Hello, welcome to the virtual orientation for the Digital Memory Lab at the Pueblo City County Library District. My name is Blake Hatton, and I am the digitization specialist for special collections. Let's get into the Memory Lab. This is what we're going to go over today. What is the Digital Memory Lab? How has COVID-19 affected the Digital Memory Lab? Because of course, we must account for that now. What does the Digital Memory Lab do and not do? What do you need to do to use the Memory Lab? And what makes good digitization? So let's get started. First thing we're going to talk about is what the Digital Memory Lab is. And it's a project that we have done in partnership with the Washington, D.C. Public Library District. It is a free space for DIY digitization, and it is located on the third floor of the Rawlings Library here on Abriendo. Funding was provided through a grant of the Institute and Museum of Library Services. Washington, D.C. Public Library District created the first Memory Lab and then received a grant to create Memory Labs all across the country. We were one of the first 7 libraries to receive this grant, and we were the first outside of Washington, D.C. to open our Memory Lab in October of 2018. Now, we do have some requirements for using the Digital Memory Lab. We do intend for the lab to be used by people 13 and up, and as a result, all individuals who want to use the Memory Lab who are under 13 must be accompanied by a parent or guardian at all times. We do require reservations for the lab. This is to ensure that time is divided fairly in the lab among people who want to digitize their material. We also require that people who wish to use the Memory Lab view or attend an orientation. Since you are viewing this orientation, you have completed that requirement. However, since you are not taking the orientation in person, you'll need to take a short quiz to show that you have viewed orientation. It's just a few questions long. It's not very hard. You'll find the link in the description of this video. Finally, if you are under 17 and you wish to use the Memory Lab, you must sign a waiver with parental consent. Now we're going to talk about reservations. The photo station is available between 10 a.m. and 7 p.m. Monday through Thursday and 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Friday and Saturday. We do have 2 stations in the Memory Lab. However, unfortunately right now, only the photo station is available. We'll get into why that is, and we'll also get into the formats that you used to be able to do, and hopefully we'll be able to do again soon. But reservations are available between 10 a.m. and 7 p.m. To make a reservation, you go to pueblolibrary.org/digitalmemorylab. You want to click the link to create a reservation. It will be highlighted on your screen. If you want to make an online reservation, you must make it a week in advance. You want to be sure to select the correct time and station for your material. The software will let you select any amount of time for your session. However, be aware that if your reservation falls outside listed reservation times, it must be changed. If you are unable to make an online reservation, call the PCCLD Special Collections Desk at 719-562-5626, and we'll be able to make your reservation for you. The one thing that we do require is that reservations must be made a day in advance. We do not allow same-day reservations. Now we're going to talk about COVID-19. The Digital Memory Lab is subject to the same time restrictions that all other spaces in the library are. The flatbed scanner is the only piece of equipment available for use at this time. As I noted earlier, we do have 2 different stations in the Digital Memory Lab, an AV station which will scan VHS tapes and compact cassettes, and a photo station with a flatbed scanner. However, we only have the flatbed scanner available for use because the amount of time that is required to digitize AV material means that you would have to stay in the library longer than is currently allowed under COVID-19 guidelines. So now let's talk about what the Digital Memory Lab can do. First thing we're going to talk about is AV material. So as I said, this station is unavailable. However, it will be in the future. The biggest thing that we can do for AV material is VHS tapes. We have a VCR that will play SVHS and regular VHS and EP and super long play VHS tapes. We can also play the smaller cousin of the VHS tape, which is the VHS-C. We have an adapter for that. So if you have those tapes, we can play those as well. We can digitize mini DV cassettes, which were a popular home video format. We can digitize compact cassettes. So if you have any of those that you have lying around with family members on them, we can digitize those. We can digitize high 8 cassettes, which are another home video format. And this was something that we implemented shortly before COVID forced the closure of the AV station. And we can digitize silent 8mm and super 8mm film. We have a machine that will do that. So if you have any of those films lying around, we can digitize those. If you're not sure what format of film you have, bring it into the library and bring it to one of us and we will help you identify it. Now we're going to talk about photographic material. And this is the material that is available to be digitized in the Digital Memory Lab right now. Of course, we can do documents. Our flatbed scanner has a scanning bed of about 12 by 17 and a half. So tabloid size papers can be scanned in the Digital Memory Lab. Photographic prints, of course, can be scanned as well. If you have them in a photo album like this photo shows here, that is possible. However, we would prefer that you take them out of the album if they are not glued down. We can also digitize slides, and slides are one of the most common formats that we actually see in the Digital Memory Lab. So we can actually scan these and get them to where you can create prints or email them or just have them on your computer. We can also scan negatives, color and black and white, and our software will scan the negative and turn it into a positive image. So in essence, we can digitally develop negatives. However, I will say that your film must be developed before. If you bring a canister of undeveloped film to the memory lab, we cannot do that, unfortunately, because it has not been fixed with chemicals to avoid it being ruined by the light. So please make sure that if you bring in any negatives to scan, that they have been developed before and are not light sensitive. Now, as much as we'd like to do everything, we can't, and the memory lab cannot do everything. We do not have the capability to digitize professional and prosumer or pro-consumer formats. So stuff like U-matic tape, which is popular in TV shows, 16mm film, which was a prosumer format, or reel-to-reel tape. We cannot digitize that, unfortunately, in the memory lab. We cannot do commercially produced recordings. The Digital Memory Lab is intended for personal material. That includes vinyl records, 8-track tapes, commercial cassettes, things like that. So any of your Disney VHS tapes, unfortunately, we do not allow in the Digital Memory Lab. And that also extends to obscure or unpopular formats simply because the hardware is far too expensive for us to procure for this kind of thing. So that's stuff like Betacam or Betamax, magnetic recording wire, L cassettes, which were popular somewhat in the 70s, things like that. Additionally, we do have some requirements for material to be digitized in the memory lab. And the biggest one is that the material must be clean. We do not allow moldy and dirty materials in the Digital Memory Lab. Dirty materials can damage the equipment, and moldy materials can spread mold to other patrons' material. Essentially, if you put a moldy photograph on the scanner, that photograph will leave mold spores behind, which will then spread to the next patron's material. AV materials must be in good physical condition. All tape must be in good playable condition without sticky shed and must be in a housing that is not cracked or broken. If you need help rehousing material, we can aid you in that. If you have a cassette that is broken, such as a VHS tape or a compact cassette, and if you have a spare VHS cassette lying around, we can help you rehouse your tape. So that way it can be played in the VCR without fear of breaking. Once again, just to emphasize, dirty and moldy material is not allowed in the memory lab. If you can't digitize your material in the memory lab, sometimes you can send it to an outside vendor for digitization or preservation. Unfortunately, I can't recommend it. Tape with sticky shed syndrome requires baking, which is not home oven baking. It must be done in a professional setting. And what sticky shed syndrome is when you have a magnetic tape, such as a compact cassette or a VHS tape, or even reel-to-reel, where the magnetic particles that are starting to flake away from the backing because they have absorbed moisture from the air. Once these magnetic particles are gone from the backing, then the information is gone forever. So that is why if you have sticky shed tape, then you want to make sure you send it to a professional digitization service who has experience with handling these. What can be done occasionally is they can be put in what is essentially a food dehydrator to get as much moisture out of there, and then maybe get 1 or 2 good plays out of the tape to get it digitized. Items that are dirty or moldy must be cleaned before being digitized in the memory lab. If you have an item with mold, you can put it in a resealable freezer-safe bag and frozen for approximately 6 months, and you should be pretty okay. Now we're going to talk about what to expect in the digital memory lab. And the first thing that I want to talk about is the limits of digitization. And the biggest thing is that it is a warts and all process. The memory lab can only digitize what is already present in the material. Rips, tears, color shifts, and dropouts in video or audio will be present in the digitized files. Unfortunately, this is not CSI, and we can't just enhance things. The next thing is that transfer happens in real time. For audio and video, the material must be played on the hardware in real time, meaning that 3 hours of tape will take 3 hours to digitize, in addition to compressing the files. When the AV station was still available, I would say that it was approximately a 1-to-3 ratio of compression time to digitization time. So 3 hours of tape would take 3 hours to digitize, and then would take an additional hour to compress. Now, the day of your reservation, you want to show up to the 3rd floor of the Rawlings Library, the Special Collections Department. You want to make sure that you bring a USB flash drive or an external hard drive that is at least 8 gigabytes. For photos, you don't need to worry about formatting your drive. For AV material, it is recommended to format flash drives to Extended File Allocation Table System, or exFAT. If you're unsure of how to do that, we can assist you in the memory lab. When you bring your stuff in, staff will inspect your material for mold or other issues like sticky shed as noted before, and then you will then be able to scan until your time within the library has expired. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the basics of digitization. And the first one is resolution. And you've probably heard resolution talked about a lot, especially in relation to computers or TVs. You might hear high definition or 4K or anything like that. But quite simply, resolution is the amount of information within an image. Resolution is often given in pixels or dots per inch, PPI or DPI. Images with higher resolution have more detail in them because you have more dots per inch than another image. However, higher resolution also means a larger file and a longer scanning time. So then that begs the question, how do you know what resolution to scan at? And the best rule of thumb is that the smaller the image, the higher the resolution it will need to be scanned at. For example, 8x10 prints should be scanned at a maximum of 600 DPI, whereas 35mm slides should be scanned at a minimum of 2400 DPI. So there's over 4 times the amount of information captured from a 35mm slide than from an 8x10 print. However, if you were not to scan at 2400 DPI, you would get a very small image that you would not be able to see. Now, just as an example of what resolution is, if you think back to elementary school art class and you learned about pointillism, and you learned how a bunch of tiny dots make up an image, that is exactly what digital resolution is. There is a bunch of tiny dots that make up your digital image, just like in this painting by Seurat. If you look at this, you can see the image. However, if you zoom in, then you can see that this image is made up a bunch of tiny, tiny little dots that have been all put together in different colors to make the image. And that is exactly how digital resolution works. Now we're going to talk about color depth. And color depth is just the amount of information used to store color in an image. So you can see here in these two charts that you have 8-bit depth, 16-bit depth, and 24-bit depth color on the right, and you have the varying bit depths of grayscale. So the upshot of this is that you want to make sure that you scan for the correct color settings for your material. So if you have black and white images, then we recommend scanning at 16-bit grayscale. And if you have color images, we recommend 24-bit color. Now, color images take up more space than black and white images because the 24-bit color requires more information to store the color than 16-bit grayscale. So what that means is that you want to make sure to scan a black and white image in black and white. Otherwise, if you scan it in color, it's still going to be black and white. It's just going to take up more space. Now we're going to talk about file formats. You want to make sure that your stuff, your files that you have digitized, are fairly stable for the long term. And the largest threat to file stability over the long term is compression. Compression is how computers make files smaller. They remove data with an algorithm and then kind of try to put it back when they render the file. For long-term digital storage, compression is undesirable because it can corrupt images. For some recommended formats, we recommend .tiff for images because it's an uncompressed file format, or a .pdf if you are uncomfortable working with TIFF. We recommend MP4 for video because even though it is compressed, it is a good balance between compression and stability, because .movs, which are often uncompressed, take up massive amounts of space. So if you have the space for an MOV file, then don't worry about it, you can use it. They take up about 100 gigabytes of space per hour. So 10 hours of footage will take up about 1 terabyte of space. And we recommend .wave for audio because that is, once again, an uncompressed sound format. The formats that we recommend avoiding are JPEGs, GIFs, and MP3s. These are not the only formats, but these are not the only formats that we recommend against using, but they are examples. JPEGs are incredibly lossy in their compression, which means that they lose a lot of color depth and information, and they are incredibly susceptible to what is called bit rot, which means that over time, these will probably get corrupted. Same thing with GIFs, and MP3s can also get corrupted as well. For storage, we recommend that files be stored on an external hard drive or in the cloud. And you should migrate your external hard drives every 5 years just to make sure that they're not going to fail. A flash drive is fine for transporting your files. So if you can't bring your hard drive to the library and you only have a flash drive to put stuff on, that is fine as long as your only copy of stuff is not on the flash drive. And I will also say never use a CDR or a DVD-R for long-term storage. No matter what the ads tell you, they are not stable. Now, this doesn't mean to say that you can't ever use a flash drive or a rewritable CD. If you want to distribute these among family members or something like that, as long as your only copy is not on the CD. As long as you have a stable copy on a hard drive, you can use these. Next, we're going to talk about metadata. And if you only remember one thing from this section here about digitization, I want it to be metadata, because metadata is absolutely crucial for keeping track of your stuff. Metadata literally means data about your data. It is the subject, the date, the description, the format of the image, anything like that. It is absolutely crucial for keeping track of the information in your personal collection. I like to call it the digital equivalent of writing on the back of a photo with a marker, writing things like who was in the photo, when the photo was taken, who originally owned the photo, things like that. That's the kind of thing that you want to include in your metadata. In Windows, an easy way to edit metadata is to right-click on your item, click Properties, and then click Details in the window that pops up. You will have several fields that you can then edit according to the way that you feel you need to put in your metadata. For Mac, you want to use the app Photos for Mac. So just to recap, the Digital Memory Lab digitizes your personal collections. Photos, slides, and negatives can all be used in the Digital Memory Lab. When the library fully reopens, AV material and recorded sound can be digitized as well. However, commercially produced items may not be digitized. We recommend using uncompressed file formats. If you use compressed file formats like JPEG, they can ruin your files over time and reduce their visual quality. Next, metadata is crucial. Metadata helps you keep track of the information in your photos, and it is something you absolutely need, especially if you're digitizing large amounts of photos. Next, COVID-19 has impacted the Digital Memory Lab, and only the photo station is available, and patron time is limited in the library. So thank you again for watching. My name is Blake Hatton once again, and I am the digitization specialist for PCCLD. In the description of this video, you will find a link to a short questionnaire. You must take this questionnaire and pass it before you can make a reservation in the Memory Lab. If you take this questionnaire, you will be asked when you come in to use the Memory Lab for the first time to fill out a waiver for your material. We look forward to seeing you in the lab.